It's gone. Hello everybody, welcome to Project G5 Episode 2. Along with the rest of the files on my Surface Pro 7, that was one of them to vanish off the face of the earth. It's fine. It's fine. Well, it looks like we're getting a fresh start. Now, I'm sorry that I didn't actually get a lot of the building process on video. I tried. Unfortunately, I was running Windows 10 on my new Mac Pro, and video editing on Windows 10 is, well, a nightmare. It did not work very well at all. Even though this is a very capable system, it did not work. I was using DaVinci Resolve, and apparently Windows 10 under the hood is, well, different is an understatement. But, yeah, I didn't like it. I was trying to edit 4K video. I was dropping frames like crazy. This is a very, very powerful computer compared to anything else I have in this house, and it still couldn't handle 4K video editing on Windows 10. I don't know what the deal with that is, but it drove me nuts. I do have some of the building process videos in my Google Photos. I'll just show a few little clips of those because they look terrible, because I uploaded them to Google Photos and it compressed them down to the bleeding edge of compressed. But yeah, it was an interesting project. I'll give you an overview on that. Now, the building process took a lot longer than expected. First, I had to prep the patient for surgery by opening the side panel on the PowerMac G5 and seamlessly ripping out every single internal that thing had. And there were a lot. I have some pictures. As you can see, there's a lot of components. The motherboard is pretty big. The CPU heatsink looks like an engine cylinder, which is interesting because PowerPC CPUs in the G5 era ran extremely hot. What else? The graphics card is tiny, runs off the slot, is passively cooled, something that you would not see nowadays. The hard disk drive I actually pulled out of my grandpa's old late 2009 27-inch iMac because the graphics card failed on that thing, and so I just thought I'd salvage the hard drive. It's 2 terabytes. It's a pretty big drive. I actually have it sitting right here. This is it. The power supply was absolutely massive and caked in dust. The RAM, I still have it. Hang on. This is a lot of RAM. This is 4.5 gigabytes of DDR2 memory in the form factor of 6 sticks. And then I just have another 2 sticks of DDR2 memory. Yeah, if you need DDR2 memory for whatever reason, hit me up. But yeah, that was about it. So it was quite the process trying to tear this thing apart. There were a lot of screws. In fact, I'm pretty sure I still have a lot of them sitting out in the open somewhere. I need to get rid of them. But yeah, it was a lot of screws, a lot of metal, a lot of pain, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I'm kidding, but it was worth it. Audio sync test. There we go. Okay, so now you're probably wondering, what could I have got in a Mac Pro for the same amount of money? Actually, yeah. For the same amount of money, nothing. If I wanted a 2019 Mac Pro the same tier, meaning I could flex on everybody with the incredible new cheese grater design, whatever, let's just go to apple.com. Oh, that's fancy. Alright. Let's hit buy and see what we can find. Now, of course, I want the tower from $7,500. Or I could get the rack-mounted server setup for $8,000. Yeah, let's just hit the tower. I don't care. Okay, so I could have got an 8-core Intel Xeon W processor with a boost up to 4 GHz. Meh. 32 gigs of DDR4 error-correcting memory. Radeon Pro 580X with 8 GB of GDDR5 memory. And a 256 gig SSD. That's it. For $7,500. Let me tell you how much I paid for this Mac Pro. I'm just going to call it a Mac Pro, I don't care. It's a Hackintosh, but I'm calling it a Mac Pro. I paid $986.63 for this entire build. And after shipping and taxes and whatnot, it was around 1,016 or something like that. But that is about 1/7 the price of Apple's base model Mac Pro, and I get quite similar performance to it. Let me show you the Geekbench results. Now just a quick disclaimer, benchmarks don't necessarily mean anything. What I think matters most in performance is if it does the job for you. If you need your computer to do a certain task and it handles it perfectly fine, then benchmark results are irrelevant. If it works for you, then great. If it doesn't, then maybe it's time for an upgrade. But yeah, I'm just saying, benchmark results don't really mean much. It's just a number. So as you can see, Apple's Mac Pro with the 8-core Xeon W processor scores higher in multi-core workloads. However, my system scores higher in single-core workloads. Why? Because while the processor in my build only has 6 cores and 12 threads, it runs at a higher single-core clock speed and has significantly more level 3 cache than the Xeon processor in Apple's Mac Pro. Now for the fun part. Let's run the Geekbench graphics compute test. For this test, I will be using the Metal backend on my GPU as Apple kind of stopped giving a crap about OpenCL a long time ago. As you can see, the AMD Radeon RX 580 in my system performs marginally better than the Radeon Pro 580X in Apple's own Mac Pro. However, all the higher-end graphics options that Apple offers blow my machine out of the water, which is why I'm only comparing my system to Apple's base model Mac Pro. Now you're probably wondering about the specs that I went with. If you caught that in the Geekbench test part of this video, you may have seen that I was not using an Intel processor. What I have in my system is an AMD Ryzen 5 3600 processor, which has 6 cores, 12 threads, 32 megabytes of cache. Actually, in total it's about 35 megabytes. But that's a lot of cache for a 6-core processor. And I'd have to say that the Ryzen 5 3600 is more similar to a Xeon than you might think. Why? Because A, it's got loads of cache, B, it also supports error-correcting memory. Now yes, I am very well aware that there are more things that make a Xeon than just error-correcting memory support and a lot of cache. Of course, Xeon processors support more memory channels and whatnot and have different CPU features and everything like that, but I'm just saying. I don't have error-correcting memory in my system. Why? Because it's overpriced and I don't need error-correcting memory in my system. Yet. That doesn't mean I can't put error-correcting memory in my system. I can. Now you may be wondering, why can't you put error-correcting memory in just a regular old Intel processor? You can't. You have to have a Xeon to put error-correcting memory in your system, which is kind of irritating. Meaning you have to pay an extra arm and a leg for error-correcting memory support. So that is why I chose an AMD processor, also because it's cheaper. For graphics, I went with a Radeon RX 580 8GB graphics card, and it performs marginally better, as I said, to Apple's base Radeon Pro 580X graphics card in their Mac Pro. For memory, I went with 32GB of DDR4 memory clocked at 3200 MHz. That's basically all I can say about it. It's awesome. 32 gigs of RAM is a bit overkill. I could be perfectly fine with 16, given that everything that I do doesn't really use more than 8 gigs of memory at a time. That's pretty great. Storage is where this thing gets exciting. I have a 500GB NVMe M.2 SSD inside there, specifically the Samsung 970 EVO Plus SSD. That thing is fast. And when I say fast, I mean 3.3 gigabytes per second sequential read-write speeds fast. Yeah. Here's Blackmagic disk speed test. So while the Samsung 970 EVO Plus SSD is rated at 3 to 3.5 gigabytes per second read-write speeds, my SSD seems to spike at about 3 gigabytes per second and then rapidly drops to around 1.1 gigabytes per second. Read speeds, however, sit at just around 3 gigabytes per second. I'm not complaining, but I found it a bit interesting that my SSD is not reaching its theoretical full speed. So yeah, that is the primary storage in my system. For secondary storage, which I did need because I underestimated the size of 4K video files, even my friend when we were building this said 500 gigs is not going to be enough if you want to edit 4K video, and I'm like, it'll be fine. macOS's storage management is better. Technically, yes, macOS's APFS is better than NTFS, but that doesn't change the file size of 4K video projects. If you've seen any of my filming projects that I post on another YouTube channel, you may know that my latest 4K 60 frames per second project that I made was about 134 gigabytes in size. That's bigger than my MacBook's SSD for one Final Cut project. It was nuts. So yeah, 500 gigs of SSD storage is not enough if you want to be doing 4K 60 frames per second on a regular basis. I shoot in 4K 30 and H.265. Why? Because I don't like 4K file sizes. But yeah, 500 gigs is not a great idea if you're trying to do a lot of 4K video editing. That being said, I do have a secondary storage device inside there, and that is a 4TB Seagate hard disk drive. I believe it's 5400 RPM, and it has speeds of around 100 to 150 megabytes per second, which is actually pretty good. But the thing is, it's 4 terabytes, and I've used up about 112 gigabytes already, and I got it for Christmas. And it is March 23rd right now. And I've already used up about 112 gigs. Yeah, that's a lot. Well, yeah, 4 terabyte storage, 500 gig SSD, pretty good. Yeah, power supply is 550 watts. There's not really much I can say about that. It's a pretty good machine so far. Alright, now the inside of my Mac Pro is, well, a huge mess in terms of cable management and placement for a lot of things. The hard disk drive that I have inside there is being held up by pure gravity, which is probably not a great idea, but it still works. For now. Let me run some cinematics and show you what this thing looks like on the outside and the inside, because it's pretty cool. finish off this video, I'll run a few more benchmarks, including Cinebench R23 and Unigine Heaven graphics benchmark, and I'll talk about my experience with operating a Hackintosh. Running the CPU render test in Cinebench R23 took about a minute and a half and delivered a very respectable score of 9,647 points. The AMD Ryzen 5 3600 processor even performed a tad faster than the 8-core Intel Core i9-9880H processor found in Apple's 16-inch MacBook Pro. Having 6 multi-threaded cores driving the workload really makes a difference, especially in my workflow where rendering and transcoding footage in Final Cut demands a significant amount of processing power. Running Unigine Heaven benchmark shows some of the capabilities of the Radeon RX 580 graphics card. While this graphics card is fairly old, being released in April of 2017, it still performs quite well. With 2,304 stream processors, 144 texture mapping units, 32 raster operations pipelines, and an 8GB GDDR5 frame buffer, this is a great all-around card, and with macOS's amazing hardware-software integration, it makes tasks like video editing and encoding or decoding 4K files quite fast. However, this card does start to show its age in more demanding workloads such as rendering very complex 3D environments like some of the scenes in Unigine Heaven. Good thing I don't do a lot of stuff that involves heavy 3D rendering. This card consumes 185 watts of power under full load, so as a result it outputs a fair amount of heat. Thankfully, it's got 2 fans on top and a very large heatsink attached to the GPU die, which keeps temperatures around 70 to 80 degrees Celsius under full load, which isn't terrible. Overall, this card does everything I need it to, which is great, and I can always upgrade it in the future, provided that those mining cryptocurrency can learn that there's other people who need graphics cards too, for more important things. Okay, so operating a Hackintosh. There's a lot of stuff that you have to be aware of, and it gets very confusing, and I would not recommend creating a Hackintosh if you're not computer savvy. That being said, I've heard it's easier on AMD than it is on Intel, because Intel you have to do USB port mapping and whatnot, because sometimes your system will just not recognize any of the USB ports. On AMD, it works fine. Either way, Intel or AMD Hackintoshes are actually more reliable than people think they are. There's a number of reasons why people think Hackintoshes are unreliable. I'm not going to dive too much into those, but other than that, operating a Hackintosh, there are some caveats. You have to be very careful when installing software updates. It's a very tricky process because you can easily mess things up, and thankfully macOS has a form of protection built in, so if it boots off of the wrong medium for installing an update, it'll just boot back into the operating system and resume where you left off, and you'll have to re-download and reinstall the update, which is fine. It just takes some extra time to do. It's not nearly as seamless as installing software updates on a regular Mac computer, but it's fine. Yeah, other than that, crashing, I haven't actually had that many issues with crashing on my computer, which is really nice. Of course, if you're trying to fiddle around with it and make your Hackintosh installation, shall we say, a little more refined, and you try to add something like a new kext or a new driver or something like that, and you don't do it properly, your computer will kernel panic very quickly, and I've gotten my fair share of those messages saying your computer was restarted because of a problem. Yeah, so Hackintosh kind of gives you a better appreciation for how macOS works under the hood. It's pretty cool. Okay, so I've just about had it up to here with procrastinating on finishing this video for the last year, and quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of it taking up 116 gigabytes of space on my SSD. I apologize that half of the shots in this video look like I just rolled out of bed, and I promise you any further Project G5 videos will be a lot shorter and will be done significantly better than this one was. Anyways, thank you for watching, goodbye!